Hello guys, welcome back to another story, and thank you for all the love and support. A Cadillac blocked my gate, and my wife was sitting inside with her lover. Two thugs stepped out and said, "She's with us now. We're here to break your ribs." I smiled. It's her choice. Bringing them? Be careful. Don't cry later. It was meant to be a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind where my only concern was finishing the custom cabinetry project waiting in my workshop. But as I drove my truck down the long gravel driveway toward the gate, I saw a sleek, jet-black Cadillac Escalade parked sideways, completely blocking the entrance. I stepped out, my boots crunching against the gravel, and noticed my wife, Elena, sitting in the passenger seat of the luxury SUV. She didn't look frightened. She looked bored, casually checking her reflection in the sun visor mirror. The man behind the wheel was Silas, a local debt collector known for working with some of the city's most questionable figures. He tapped his fingers against the leather dashboard, as if he had all the time in the world. Before I could ask what was happening, the rear doors of the Cadillac swung open. Two massive men wearing matching tactical jackets stepped out, their faces fixed in the cold, practiced expressions of professional enforcers. Elena finally rolled down her window, a smug, icy look spreading across her face as she stared at me like I was nothing. "I'm done with this simple life, Liam," she sneered, her voice thick with arrogance that made my stomach tighten. "Silas offers a lifestyle you couldn't provide in 3 lifetimes. I'm taking my half of the estate now, whether you like it or not." One of the thugs, a man with a jagged scar slicing across his eyebrow, stepped forward and cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp like snapping dry branches. "She's with us now," he said, his voice low and threatening. "We're here to make sure you don't make this divorce difficult. We're here to break your ribs and remind you that some people are too expensive for you to keep." An icy calm settled over me as I looked at the two men, then at the woman I had spent 12 years protecting, providing for, and loving. She believed she was upgrading her life, bringing hired muscle into a private matter, to make sure I wouldn't challenge her outrageous demands. But she had forgotten one small detail about the boring man she was leaving. The 10 years I had spent as the lead instructor for the state's elite tactical response unit before retiring to live quietly as a carpenter. I didn't reach for a weapon. I didn't call for help. I simply shifted my weight and gave them a small, steady smile, one that clearly unsettled them. "It was her choice to leave," I said quietly. "But bringing them here? That was your mistake." The scarred man didn't wait. He let out a rough shout and charged at me, his partner right behind him, brass knuckles flashing in the fading sunlight. They expected a frightened husband, someone who would panic and beg. Instead, as they rushed forward, I stepped into the first attacker's path and used his own momentum against him, redirecting his weight toward the gravel. The driveway filled with the harsh sounds of scuffling boots and sharp breaths. As the balance of power shifted, Elena's bored expression disappeared instantly. Her eyes widened as she watched the simple carpenter move with controlled, deadly precision she had never seen before. The first thug overcommitted to a heavy right hook, meant to end the fight immediately. But I wasn't where he thought I'd be. I pivoted on my left heel, gravel grinding beneath my boot, caught his wrist, and redirected his force straight into the side of my heavy-duty pickup truck. The impact of his head against metal echoed through the driveway like a dull gong. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious before he even understood what had happened. His partner froze for a fraction of a second. The brass knuckles in his fist suddenly looked small and useless against someone who moved like a shadow. From inside the Cadillac, Silas stopped tapping his fingers, his face drained of color, as he quickly reached for the door handle to lock it. The second man realized quickly that he wasn't dealing with an ordinary civilian. He reached for a collapsible baton at his belt, but I was already inside his guard. I drove a sharp palm strike into his solar plexus, forcing the air out of him in a broken gasp that left him bent over and struggling to breathe. I didn't let him recover. I swept his leg out from under him and drove him to the ground, pinning him with my knee pressed firmly into his lower back, my hand locking the back of his neck in place. "I told you," I whispered calmly, as if I were explaining a cut of wood in my workshop. "It was a mistake to bring this to my house." He groaned into the dirt, and the brass knuckles meant for my ribs slipped from his hand and clattered harmlessly across the gravel. Elena was no longer. admiring herself in the mirror. She stared through the windshield, her mouth hanging open in silent disbelief. The man she had mocked for living a simple life had dismantled 2 professional enforcers in less than 30 seconds without breaking a sweat. She turned to Silas, expecting him to act, to use the power and influence he had bragged about. But Silas was already shifting the Cadillac into reverse, his eyes wide with panic. He didn't care about Elena or the half of the estate she had promised him. He only cared that he had brought a knife to a gunfight, and the gun was now staring straight at him. I stood, leaving the second thug groaning in the dirt, and walked slowly toward the driver's side window of the Escalade. I didn't run or shout. My slow, deliberate steps were far more unsettling than any burst of anger. Silas fumbled with the gear shift, the engine roaring as he tried to back onto the main road. But the gate was still partly closed, and the heavy iron bars caught his rear bumper with a screech of tearing metal. I tapped lightly on the reinforced window, the same steady smile still on my face. "You're blocking my driveway, Silas," I said evenly, my voice cutting through the sound of the struggling engine. "And I think it's time we talk about how much this visit is going to cost you." He looked like a man who had just realized he was trapped in a cage with a predator he had mistaken for a house cat. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the steering wheel. He rolled the window down an inch, and the smell of burnt rubber and expensive leather drifted into the evening air. "Look, man, this was her idea," he stammered, glancing at the 2 groaning men behind me. "She told me you were just some woodworker who wouldn't fight back." Elena finally snapped out of her shock, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "Don't listen to him, Silas. You have a gun in the glove box. Use it," she screamed, her voice echoing through the trees and revealing the depth of her malice. The silence that followed was absolute, cold enough to drain the warmth from the twilight. Silas looked at the glove box, then at me. In my eyes, he saw the truth. A man who had faced far worse than a panicked debt collector with a hidden weapon. I kept my hands relaxed at my sides, yet the weight of my presence seemed to hold him in place. "Go ahead, Silas," I said softly. "Open it. See if your hands are fast enough to beat 10 years of muscle memory. But remember, once that box opens, you're no longer just the guy who blocked my driveway." He swallowed hard and pulled his hand away from the dashboard as if it had burned him. Turning to Elena, his fear shifted into cold disgust. "You're insane," he hissed. "You never said he was a ghost from the tactical units." He reached across her and unbuckled her seatbelt with a sharp click that sounded final. Then he shoved the passenger door open. "Get out. You're on your own. I'm not dying over a divorce settlement." Elena's eyes widened as he pushed her from the idling Cadillac. Her expensive heels slipped on the gravel as she stumbled to the ground. Silas didn't wait. He slammed the door, forced the Escalade into a frantic 3-point turn that tore deep ruts into my lawn, and sped off, leaving dust and the bitter scent of defeat behind him. Elena sat in the dirt, dust settling over her designer clothes. The 2 thugs slowly dragged themselves up, clutching bruised ribs and wounded pride as they limped toward the road. She was alone now, stripped of the muscle and money she believed would shield her from consequences. I stood over her as the shadows of the tall pines stretched across the driveway like prison bars. She tried to hold on to a look of defiance, but tears spilled down her face, not from regret, but from the realization that she had lost everything in 30 seconds. "What are you going to do to me?" she whispered, her voice shaking in the cool night air. I looked down at her and saw not the woman I once loved, but a stranger who had gambled her soul on a shadow and lost. The simple life she had despised was now the only thing protecting her from the harsh world she had tried to enter. "I'm not going to do anything to you, Elena," I said steadily. "I'm going to give you exactly what you wanted. Your half of the estate, but because you brought criminals to my gate to threaten my life, it will go through a court-appointed trustee, while you deal with the conspiracy charges I'm filing tonight." The confrontation didn't end with more violence or dramatic force. It ended with the quiet, unyielding weight of the law. I walked back to my truck and took out my phone. The dash cam had recorded every second, the threats, the assault, and Elena screaming for Silas to use a weapon. She watched in stunned silence as I called the local sheriff, a man I had trained years earlier, and calmly explained what had happened. The 2 thugs didn't attempt to flee. They knew the area was remote, and that their employer had abandoned them. They sat on the edge of the ditch, waiting for the flashing lights that would mark the end of their careers. A year later, the gravel driveway was peaceful again. The ruts had been repaired, and a new reinforced gate stood at the entrance. Elena received intensive probation and a heavy fine for her role in the attempted assault, which drained the very lifestyle fund she had tried to secure. She moved to the city, living in a small apartment far from the luxury she once chased. I stayed in my workshop and discovered that wood is easier to shape than people. It doesn't lie, it doesn't betray, and it doesn't bring hired muscle to your door demanding what it hasn't earned. I finished the cabinetry project and began teaching self-defense classes to local residents, sharing the skills that saved my life that Tuesday evening. I learned that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the ability to stand firm when conflict blocks your path. The woman in that Cadillac thought she was taking my future. Instead, she gave it back to me, free from lies and the burden of someone who never truly belonged beside me. Now I live the simple life I always wanted. The only things that block my gate are the occasional wandering deer or the morning mist rolling off the hills. If your spouse brought dangerous people to your home to settle a score, would you forgive them for the sake of the past, or make sure they never had the chance to hurt you again? I'm curious, where in the country are you listening from? And did you know nearly 80% of our viewers still haven't subscribed? If you enjoyed this 4-act story of a husband who stood his ground, hit the subscribe button. And check out our next video about a shocking Reddit cheating story where a husband uncovers the truth about his unfaithful wife.